Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest is Paul Battaglia, the Vice President of Federal Sales for BlackBerry. Now, Paul, before break, you were telling us all the problems, all the scary numbers, the 3 times as many devices that are being connected to the internet over the next 3 to 4 years, the number of attacks that happen, the fact that attackers now are going after cell phones and connected devices much more than we've seen in the past. There's got to be some solutions here. At the very end, you give us a little teaser. There's policy solutions. There's technology solutions. Let's start us with the policy side.
Well, thank you, Jason. Some of these are very much common sense. One thing the government has done over the years is accumulated several hundred different platforms to manage all kinds of different devices, right? So you might have a platform to manage your PCs on the network. You might have a platform, mobile device management platform to manage your phones. It's simply now the best policies come down to managing mobility the same way or in conjunction with managing all your other things on the network, right? Your PCs, for example, your laptops. This is a mobile workforce. But if you can consolidate those to make the management easy without having to worry about updates, upgrades to software, education, and training, this helps in our cyber defenses. Familiarity is important in consolidating. Fortunately, we're seeing many agencies now adopt this policy and actually implement it, getting down to the common phrase is a single pane of glass to manage all the devices on their network. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, at the same time, and in conjunction with this, they're looking to connect now. Agencies are looking to connect right onto existing networks. BlackBerry happens to have a network people can connect on. There are other networks. And this reduces the number of ports going into the firewall of an agency. Therefore, fewer ports means fewer opportunities for a hacker to get through. So that is also being adopted. We now hear that Congress is looking at some legislation to help in procurement processes. You know, an internet year, Jason, is only 3 months, right? An internet year is 3 months. A government fiscal year is 12. Our adversaries are not waiting for the next procurement before they attack. They're attacking us daily. So we're looking at reform in that area. It's being pushed heavily on the Hill. We're hopeful for some legislation in that area that will speed up our procurement processes. If you go back to 1941, Churchill said to FDR, "Give us the tools and we'll finish the job," referring to World War II. The same euphemism can be used today with our cyber defenses and our cyber teams. If we give them the tools, they'll finish the job.
I know you bring up procurement. We could talk all day about it, but I'm going to back us up for a second and talk about the MDM piece, the managing devices. It's amazing. I am surprised to hear that they have so many different ways to manage devices. It's one thing to say I'm going to manage laptops and desktops one way, but they even have multiple ways to manage mobile devices, don't they?
They do. There are multiple ways. And I've been into some large organizations here in the government where they have 4 and 5 different MDMs that are departmentalized.
Can we blame vendors on that? Too many salespeople?
There are probably too many salespeople, too many promises. But there could be a specific fit that an MDM had in a specific area.
And is it just the evolution that 5, 7, 8 years ago when agencies were buying and getting on board with MDMs, that they weren't so the solution was very pointed, where this is for, we'll pick on BlackBerry, this is for BlackBerry phones. You don't make phones anymore, we know that, but we'll pick on you for a second since you're here. And then, I need one for an Android. I need one for an Apple. I need one for something else. But now really any MDM can manage almost any type of device. Is that part of this? That's the evolution we're seeing?
I think that is exactly the evolution. You know, in our case, for example, BlackBerry used to manage BlackBerry phones, but now it's all heterogeneous. Right? We manage iOS and Androids and BlackBerries all with the same levels of security. So the need to have these point products has really dissipated, at least in our case, that we can speak to. We can manage other devices even on the network. You're seeing, again, we talked about the enterprise of things so that goes even beyond mobility. So the goal is here to create a centralized system that I can manage all the things on the network, mobility, tablets, PCs, laptops, even the outside things like air conditioning units and so on and so forth, everything that's being connected.
And I know I mentioned at the very beginning of the opening that the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program was looking down that path too. So I think that you're from a trend perspective, you're absolutely right. The other thing that you talk about as we talk about policy is not just consolidation of the MDM, but you also talk about the training piece and the workforce piece, and that has to be a policy side too. Maybe talk a little bit about that piece of it, because you need the people, not just the technology. And we'll get to technology in a second, or not just the policy in this case.
Yeah, in the case of mobility, Jason, the enforcement of policy is critical here. With each new revision of an operating system, say iOS or an Android, we get deeper and deeper encryption. But with millions of phones out there within the government, how do you enforce what level they're at? This becomes critical, right? Hackers become familiar with a certain level of the operating system. They know how to tunnel through it. So it's important that we keep all of our phones up to date to have that encryption embedded. The same thing with applications on the phone. Applications need to be updated for the same reasons. And, the other issue we've been dealing with here in the government, as in industry, is simply talent shortages, right? The number of people who specialize in this area is not large. It's a growing field. I mean, we have great news coming out of places like the Naval Academy, where the former deputy director of NSA, Chris Inglis, has designed a wonderful curriculum, and it's now the most popular and the fastest growing major at the academy itself. So this is the hope we have, is that we have our best and brightest on this problem now.
You bring up this idea of patching, this idea of making sure you're up to date. That's one of the big challenges. They call it cyber hygiene on the desktop. What's happening on the mobile device level is a similar thing. Is there a way to ensure that you can stay up to date with your patches and the latest OS?
Well, one of the best tools that is now available are notification tools from the IT department to the users out there. So we can send out now mass distribution text messages to the users in our user base to notify them that they need to be in compliance by a certain date, and then they need to report back to the IT department that they've complied with that request. Again, one of the more important things we can do in terms of, as you call it, cyber hygiene, is keep that operating system up to date.
And I think you make a great point to say, it's the weakest link piece. And if I haven't updated my OS in 6 months or 8 months, and all of a sudden a hacker has figured out a way to exploit that OS because you did, and then the company patched it, but you didn't accept that patch, that becomes all of a sudden a huge hole in the network. And that goes back to this idea of VPNs as well. Maybe this is the technology side we get into now. Are there ways to deal with the technology side? Policy first, technology second?
Yeah, I think I think the best approach is to deal with them in parallel, right?
I guess I meant in our conversation. Not just you're right. Nothing's done by itself. Go ahead, Paul.
Agree. There are many things now. Again, policy enforcement is job one. It's something we can do today. We have great technology, and there are very specific technologies now available to protect a phone, right? I talked about earlier a container on a phone. A container is a specialized area in the phone that was originally designed to separate corporate or government data from personal data on one's phone. But now it is really a security apparatus in the government to protect that phone against rogue intruders. It has bigger levels, deeper levels of encryption in it, and it becomes much more of a challenge to a rogue actor to get into it. So the container isolates the government data, and then it controls and encrypts the use of the sensitive data and has policies to prevent distribution of the data off the phone.
And that means, let's break it down to a smaller level. If I'm hacking your phone and I can not only not get into your container, but if I do get into the container, there's still 2, 3, 4 more levels of security in there.
That's correct. It's very deep security. It is something that is now thankfully being widely adopted throughout the government. And the containers used to be, in the old days of 3 or 4 years ago, it used to be kind of clunky, kludgy technologies. Now they're not. They're very seamless in the environment. And you can use them, for example, with multi-factor authentication, which I use in my own business life daily. I have 2 ways of having to, that I can get into my corporate email. One through my phone, one through my desktop, but I have to get permissions on both devices before I can do it. So if I lose a phone, or if I have a laptop stolen, for example, someone would probably have to be pretty clever to get into my laptop because they don't have the second factor of authentication.
You bring up multi-factor authentication. We could probably talk all day about the DoD CAC or the PIV in the civilian sector, but maybe just give me a top-level sense of where two-factor, multi-factor authentication is going as it relates back to mobile devices. Your example was very good. You need 2 phones maybe to get on your laptop, or a second factor to get on your network. But where else can it go with the phone itself, maybe?
Yeah, well, I think the big thing in the government here is, since you bring up CAC, is for years now, the government, the DoD, has been trying to get rid of the CAC in favor of something called derived credentials, which actually produces your certificate on the phone to show that you are who you say you are. And this has now been adopted in FISMA requirements coming out of Congress, and is now widely adopted in a program called Purebred in the DoD, something we comply with and something most manufacturers are working to comply with.
We've written a lot about purebred. It's a very interesting topic. I'm not sure I'm not sure why it has not spread yet to the civilian side, but that's a different discussion. Paul, we're almost out of time. This has been a very fascinating conversation, but before I let you go, we've talked a lot about the problems. We've talked about some longer term solutions. What is something that someone can do today or tomorrow? What is something that an agency, a CISO, can make a difference today to protect their mobile devices? What are a few things that come to mind?
Well, one of the areas, there's a powerful technology now out called digital rights management. And this is also, again, thankfully being widely adopted and widely looked at. But essentially, this is a technology that, or a policy coupled with a technology that prevents the next Edward Snowden, right? So we have leaks in the government. You've probably heard about those. Sometimes they're accidental leaks. Sometimes, in the case of Snowden, they're not accidental. What digital rights management does, and again, this can be done via a phone, is protects our vital information that's contained on a phone. So a document, for example, a vital document, we can put a moat around that document and put specific policies around that document. I may not want that document circulated outside the corporate network, the government network that it's on. So I'll geofence it within that network. I might want to watermark it so no one can take a picture of it. These are all the kinds of things. In the case of Snowden stole documents via a thumb drive. And I can even set a policy now that says this data that you're looking at now cannot be copied to any kind of storage device other than the one that's on. So this is very, very powerful technology that needs to get around the government very quickly. It is being widely adopted. There's some great use cases on it. Our Air Force is using it now for their flight bag program to protect our fleet, our air fleet, and many other ways. Many other agencies are using it to protect information. But it is widely being adopted, and there is hope now to protect information from leaks.
You know, you're making my life as a journalist just a little bit harder by can't take pictures, can't move storage devices. So I'll come back to you on that. Paul, this has been a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. So let me thank my guest, Paul Battaglia, the Vice President of Federal Sales for BlackBerry. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, Jason. Good to be with you.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search innovation.